You know, when the weather's bad, you're supposed to leave extra time and leave early. That's what I did.
Dude, you live a block away. We've already established that you can walk here.
Anyway, that's Harry Jaffe, co-author of Dream City. Without him,
Hi,
the book
Harry.
would not have been written because he's the writer and I just knew everything. Go ahead. What's your question,
Go
Harry?
ahead, Harry.
Ask him about Atlanta.
We answered that before you got here. He's saying both publicly and privately he is not. Well, I'm
Tune
not
in tomorrow at noon, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kojo. All right, let's get started. Do we have anybody announcing anything or? Okay. Well, welcome everybody.
Welcome to the Hill Center.
Yes. There are 4x7 cards on your chairs for you to write questions, and just somebody will come around and get them. Since Kojo takes phone calls, we're gonna try to get to your questions. So please write some up. If you have a cell phone, and as I tell everyone, I never ask you to turn your cell phone off. However, if it rings, you have to stand up and put it on speaker. Do you have a cell phone?
Yep.
Segraves is dead, so his won't matter. You have it on vibrate? We'll find out. And so we'll get started. Kojo Namdi, welcome.
Thank you very much, sir.
Are you prepared?
No.
Let's start at the beginning. Just checking to see if the hat is a name brand or I don't recognize it.
It's got a hidden mic, actually.
Okay. 75 years ago, almost, you were born on one of the busiest corners of Georgetown, the capital of Guyana, which is located on the East Atlantic coast near Venezuela. That Georgetown is called the Garden City of the Caribbean. You say there is a tale to be told about your birth on that corner. Speaking to the mic since it's rare to you.
I see you've done your research. The tale is not really about my birth, even though I was born at home on that corner. The tale is really about growing up on that corner and how it prepared me for life. It was one of the busiest intersections in the city, and the house that we lived in was owned by the owner of what was known as the rum shop next door on the corner. And on the other side of the house where we lived was a winery. The rum shop was largely patronized by stevedores, people who worked on the waterfront, which was about 4 or 5 blocks away. And in those days, a rum shop in Guyana was kind of a male-only establishment. The individuals who drank there, and that's really all they did, were hard-working, hard-living men who usually came right after they got off from work in the evenings and just drank. And there was a little anteroom that the rum shop had that was run by a shoemaker named Murph, who only had one leg and walked with crutches. And there were a number of stevedores who used to gather in Murph's little hideaway to drink and talk. For some reason or the other, from the time I was about 4 years old, I found that little hideaway very attractive. And whenever my parents missed me, they knew they could find me sitting among the stevedores in Murph's shoemaker shop. And I heard a lot of very profane, very educational, very interesting conversations in that shoemaker shop. And on my 8th birthday, my parents decided that they would throw me a birthday party, and they invited all of the men from the shoemaker shop And it was said that that was the first time anybody had ever seen Murph climbing stairs. And they were the guests at my 8th birthday party, and they were the center for my social life until I was about 10 years old. And I picked up a lot of knowledge from those people. Inside my house, located on that corner, my parents had a wide variety of friends with in a wide variety of ages, ranging from their 50s to their 20s. And their conversation was generally centered on politics around the world. When I was 9 years old, in 1954, 53, 54, I remember my parents and their friends talking about some guy named Mossadegh who had been overthrown in some place named Iran, and how the United States was involved. That was the environment in which I was reared. At the same time, this was the push for independence that was taking place both in Africa and in the Caribbean. So there was a great deal of conversation about if and when we should get independence from Britain, how that independence would be accomplished, what organizations were being formed. There was a great deal of argument about that. And then when I was 12 years old, because that corner was so busy in 1957, I opened the window and looked out, and there were all of these people walking by dressed in the finest African regalia. And I asked my parents, "What's going on?" And they said, "Today is Ghana's Independence Day."
Oh,
And on Ghana's Independence Day, it means that all of us who are colonized have hope for our own independence. So we are all celebrating it. People came from all kinds of rural areas of the country to gather in that neighborhood because we also lived about a block away from one of the major marketplaces in the city. So there was always a lot of traffic going up and down, people walking to and from the marketplace. There was a recording store right down the street where all of the better known calypso singers recorded. So there was always a lot of activity going on. That's the environment in which I grew up. That's the environment in which I got interested in politics, and probably why I'm here today.
okay. Your answer was almost as long as Jim Vance's first answer.
And
But
I
that was
admire
good.
Vance
That's
a
very
lot.
good. Who is Rex Orville Montague Paul? Rex Orville Montague Paul. Who is that?
Me. That's the name I was given at birth.
Do you call
My
it?
parents got a little carried away. So I had 3 Christian names, as did all of my siblings. My sister is Jacqueline Esther Sandra Paul. My brother's Hugh Alster Roland Paul. And we thought this was a common practice until we found out that none of our peers had 3 Christian names. I think my parents had a lot of friends who insisted on being a part of the naming process, and they wanted to please everybody.
Your mother's name was Gladys.
Yes.
But did she have a lot of names?
No, she was just Gladys Althea Paul. She only had
And your
2
father?
Christian names. Hugh Eustace Paul.
We'll get into when you changed your name a little bit later.
Yes.
Your mother, Gladys, did change your life dramatically. Although you were, as you said, politically aware, she was concerned that you were too casual and easygoing and having too much fun on the streets of Georgetown with your motorbike. And you had a lot of fun, and you were selling insurance to field workers. I didn't know about that. It's some kind of insurance. I'm sure it was legal. She secretly saved the money that you earned selling insurance, and she, on your behalf, applied to the McGill University in Montreal, Canada. I'm saying all this so he doesn't have to say it. It'll take an hour. And without your
The
knowledge,
shorthand is she mailed me out of the country.
right? And you were quoted in an article I read in Generation Progress. One day she put a ticket in my hand, and I said I would be leaving for Montreal in 1 week. That was the fall of 1967, and you went.
Exactly right. She saw a university career ahead of me. I didn't. As you said, I was selling what was known as industrial insurance, and we were selling it to sugar workers on sugar estates in rural areas. And it's a very exploitative kind of insurance because these workers had to pay weekly, but because the workers worked seasonally, it meant that they could only afford to pay during the months when sugar was grinding and they were cutting sugar cane. And as a result, invariably, after a few months, their policies lapsed, by which time the insurance salesman had gotten our commissions and had moved on. And so it was a very exploitative form of insurance. And I didn't want to do that for a long time, but I was very young and enjoying doing that because I made a great deal of money. As you said, I had a motorbike and I was having a very good time and saw absolutely no reason to leave the country. My mother, who had a lot more foresight than I did, then got me admitted to McGill University in Montreal, Canada, and essentially mailed me, as I said, off to Montreal. And it is in Montreal that my interest, my political interest in the civil rights movement, when I got to Montreal, morphed into interest and participation in the Black Power movement, because that was what.
This is 67, is for those old enough to know the world was in turmoil.
Yes, at that point.
Unlike now.
At that point in the civil rights movement in this country, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which really had its roots in the South, there you go, registering people to vote and training people to organize, had by 1966 become a more militant organization, and under the leadership of the man who was then known as Stokely Carmichael, endorsed the slogan and the concept of Black Power. And for those of us who are Black students and on college campuses across North America, that appealed to us somewhat more than the nonviolent approach that was taken by the traditional civil rights movement, because we were young, we were feeling our oats, so to speak, and we felt that there needed to be a more militant approach to civil rights, and that Black Power, we felt, offered an opportunity to do that.
And in fact, in 1968, you left Montreal and went to New York to be an activist. I have been told that you were quite loud and you were gave speeches and harangued the crowd. It's so unlike you now. You're so polite, and take note, Segraves, polite, well-spoken, but at a time you were a radical.
Yes, in New York.
Or did the white people think you were a radical? To your mind, were you a radical?
Yes. I grew attracted when I got to New York to the Black Panther Party. And so I briefly joined the Black Panther Party in New York. And those were the days when the Black Panther Party was at its most militant, when, you know, we had the black leather jackets, we had the black berets, and we paraded around, and we if we didn't advocate violence, we certainly advocated resistance to all kinds of violence that we felt were being perpetrated on the Black community. However, a lot of people forget that the Black Panther Party's maybe most important contribution at the time was the fact that we ran breakfast programs around the country. And even today, such breakfast programs are still necessary, but the Black Panther Party started doing that in Oakland, California. They did it in Chicago, they did it in New York, they did it in other places. They did perform community service, but we had a very militant posture because, well, that's what we were about.
And I'm going to let Mark get in. I just want to get back. This is an interesting history, but these are some of the highlights. I want to know when you changed your name, but we'll get to that in a moment. So you were in New York, but then you decided to come in 1969 to attend Federal City College here in Washington. But you were an actor, and you performed children's plays on WOL radio. Your on-air name was Brother Uwezo. Is it Uwezo or Wezo?
Wezo.
Wezo. But you were a Pan-Africa. I read this. Do you know where this story came from?
No.
I've got a lot more.
I didn't cooperate. I don't remember cooperating with that story.
So you haven't heard this? Were you Brother
I lived it, but I haven't heard it.
Were you Brother Wazo?
I sure was Brother Wezo.
Wezo. You said Wazo. Is it Wezo or Wazo? Up to the. Okay. You know, Southerners, we have bad ears. So why Washington? And have you changed your name yet?
No. In '69, when I came to Washington, the Black Panther Party had started to move left, and under the guidance of Huey P. Newton, who I think was incarcerated at the time, started moving towards Marxism-Leninism. And at the time, I was still in my kind of Black power, Black nationalist mode. And there was a cousin of mine who lived in Washington who told me about a Black education program operating out of Federal City College at the time that encompassed not only the areas of history and culture and literature that were thought to be appropriate for Black studies, but was also teaching math and science in the context of this Black education program. And I found that to be very appealing and decided that I would move to Washington to participate in that program. By the time I got here in August of 1969, that program had exited Federal City College and relocated itself in the African American community in the 1400 block of Fairmont Street Northwest. And so I arrived here and joined what was essentially an organization that embraced the concept of Pan-Africanism. And going back to my life in Guyana, I started acting in high school. I went to an all-male kind of prep school in Guyana, and because I was interested in acting at a very early age, and because the school was all male, the first roles I got at that school were female roles. I played Brutus's wife Portia in Julius Caesar, and I played in Bernard Shaw's The Apple Cart. I played Orinthia. But as my career went on, I began to get male roles, and so by the time I played the McGill Players when I was there in Montreal, and so by the time I got here, they needed somebody who could coordinate the drama group at the Center for Black Education, and that became me.
So when did you do? Are you enjoying this, Mark?
He doesn't
I'm
have to
enjoying
do
the
anything.
answers.
He might as well.
Do you have a question you want to ask about his name?
You've teased it like 5 times.
I think it's
Just
interesting
get
that he
to it.
changed his name from Rex Orville Montague Paul to Kojo Namdi.
Correct.
And when and why? And what significance does that name have for you?
At the Center for Black Education, we had a print publication, and ultimately, the drama group, which used to stage plays in the community, was invited to fill some time during the public affairs hours at WOL AM radio. And so we started doing children's plays called Saya Watoto, Hour of the Children.
Was that
And-
owned by the Post at the time, WOL, or had sold it to Kathy Hughes?
No, it was owned by the Sonderling Corporation at the time. It
Okay.
had not yet been sold to Kathy Hughes. However, the public affairs director at that station who organized or who invited us there was Dewey Hughes, who became Kathy Hughes's husband. She was then Kathy Liggins, but that's a long story. And in those days, radio stations were required to present public affairs programming by law. And so they generally buried it on Sunday evenings when they thought no one was listening. And they looked around for people who could fill that time for free. And because we were an activist organization, we worked for free. So they liked the Children's Hour. And so they said, why don't you guys do a news magazine? And since we used to put out a newspaper called the Pan-African, we decided to do a weekly half-an-hour news magazine called Sauti, which means the voice in Swahili. I was the editor of that program and did a weekly commentary under the name Wezo. At some point, both the Center for Black Education and Drum and Spear Bookstore, with which it was affiliated, by the early 1970s, both of those organizations began to flounder a little bit. And in, I guess it was 1971, I decided that I would get married. And my wife,
First,
that was my second. I was married in New
Second.
York. Yes, I was married in New York.
I had trouble keeping track.
So did I. Life moved fast in those days. And both my wife and I decided to change our names to African names. And I took the name Kojo Namdi. My wife took the name Kai, Kai. And that's how I got the name changed. But I never, ever formally changed my name. So if you Google me, you will see all of the above mentioned English names that Tom mentioned. And in those days, by the time I got to radio in 1973, there were a lot of people in radio who used pseudonyms. And so it worked really well to have.
Does your driver's license, you have a driver's license.
I do.
Does it have your English?
Yep. It says
That-
Rex
it's-
O'Paul.
There's not room on that little license for a name that long.
Rex. It doesn't have all of the Christian names on it. But
And
it says Rex
Kojo and
O'Paul.
Namdi means there are meanings to each name.
Kojo means born on Monday, which I was. Namdi I took because I was a great admirer of the first Prime Minister of Nigeria after independence, a man named Nnamdi Azikiwe, who, by the way, attended Howard University. And I was a great admirer of his. So I took his as a last name, not realizing at the time that Nnamdi is generally used as a Christian name in Nigeria. But who knows? Segraves?
I was born on Monday.
Is that the best? What's the worst day of the week for the worst child? Is that like
What day were you
Wednesday?
born on?
I don't know. I like to embrace the entire
Kojo, you
week.
mentioned Dewey Hughes.
Yes.
So it makes me wonder if you and Petey Green ever crossed paths.
Petey Green was a friend.
You
Yes.
have to say who P.D. Green is for the audience.
Perhaps Kojo will tell us about Petey, who you should know from radio and TV here in DC, was a incredible talk show host
Sat in a big rattan chair
on TV on Channel 20 early in the morning when we were cleaning out our bong water. We would be watching Petey Green, and there was a movie made about him. Talk to Me. That premiered here in Washington, D.C., as a matter of fact. But tell us about what you can about you and Petey Green.
Petey Green, as Mark pointed out, was a legendary broadcaster in Washington who, like our late friend Mark Plotkin that we memorialized yesterday, invented himself. Petey Green did. He was a small-time hustler, and he was incarcerated at Lorton Reformatory. And during the course of his incarceration at Lorton Reformatory, an inmate climbed the water tower, climbed to the top of the water tower and refused to get down. And the corrections officers couldn't get him down. They sent the police couldn't get him down. And then eventually, Petey Green, the inmate, said, "Allow me to talk to him." And Petey Green was able to talk that inmate down off of the water tower. He would later say, "It took me longer to get him to go up there than it took me to talk him down from the water tower." But as a result of that, his sentence was reduced and he was released from prison